The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
The governor of the National Bank of Georgia says the future dynamics of inflation are of particular importance for the monetary policy of the National Bank. According to him, inflation has been exceeding its target rate for quite a long time, and the risks of increasing inflationary expectations still remain. According to Obagvenetadze, we should expect inflation to return to the target rate in the second half of the next year. The European Parliament supported the imposition of sanctions against the former Prime Minister of Georgia, Bidzina Ivanishvili. The Sixth Amendment to the resolution, authored by Miriam Lexman, states that personal sanctions should be imposed on Ivanishvili and all those people who are responsible for the deterioration of democratic processes. 275 deputies supported this amendment at today's session. 212 MEPs went against it. 132 abstained. The Budget and Finance Parliamentary Committee discussed and approved the final draft State Budget 2022 introduced by the First Deputy Finance Minister, Giorgi Kakauridze. As he noted, no new changes have been introduced to the draft after the committee considerations. The draft updates the macroeconomic forecasts. This is The Checkpoints. I'm Eleni Kvangelashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up Business and Economics Week. This week, the main message came from the Prime Minister, Irakli Garibashvili. He said Anaklia port would be built with state participation. Several months ago, I instructed the Ministry of Economy, and we are preparing a new tender. According to our decision, the port of Anaklia will be built with the participation of the state, where the state will own 51%, and we will announce an international competition for the rest and select partner companies. This project is abandoned. The place is wrecked. Therefore, it is categorically unacceptable. We should urgently select international partner companies, and we should also start investing in this project. This project will be implemented with our participation. The state will implement this project together with foreign or other companies, said the Prime Minister. Irakli Garibashvili added that previous investors, namely Anaklia Development Consortium, could not carry out the project, and the state had to cancel the contract. He used some strong words and called the appeal of investors to the international arbitration as the case of robbery. Mamuka Khazaradze and Badri Japaridze invested only 3 million into the project. Some 27 million was invested by other investors, and now they want to rob citizens of Georgia, taxpayers of Georgia, and demand for the state to reimburse 1.5 billion. This is a sheer case of robbery, the Prime Minister stated on the government sitting this week. Shortly after, the Anaklia Development Consortium ADC issued the following statement in response to the 12 December 2022 comments by Prime Minister Garibashvili. In his speech to the government meeting today about the Anaklia Port project, Prime Minister Garibashvili made a series of misrepresentations about the Anaklia project and its past history. He also made assertions about the future of the project which are sure to fail. We would remind the Prime Minister that the dispute between the Anaklia Development Consortium and the government of Georgia is in arbitration at the International Chamber of Commerce in Geneva. He will be answerable for all his false statements today in that forum as well as before the Georgian public. ADC wishes to point out a few of the most dramatically false and misleading points in the Prime Minister's speech. The idea that the Georgian state can find a serious private investor for Anaklia port while planning to take a 51% controlling interest in the project is absurd. It is the kind of corrupt and deluded privatization and concession process that was attempted in Georgia and the other former Soviet Union countries in the 1990s. It failed then, it was infused with gross corruption then, and the same would be true now. Moreover, no serious investor and no international financial institution will participate in or lend to a major project such as this if it is majority controlled by the Georgian state, especially given the Georgian state's demonstrated unreliability as a partner in numerous business cases. Second, it is quite clear that the government has failed completely in seeking out any legitimate investors or port operators willing to take on this project, given the existence of the arbitration claims along with the politicized Georgian judicial system, which this government has failed to reform. Third, it defies belief that the government will invest 300 million USD in the development of Anaklia port in cash from the budget or other state funds when it refused to contribute even 50 million USD as a guarantee, not cash, to facilitate the financing of the construction of the port by ADC. Fourth, the idea that the Prime Minister wants the government to proceed with Anaklia urgently is obviously wrong. The government has sat on its hands for close to 3 years since terminating the Anaklia project. It even said in February 2020 it would announce plans for a tender within 2 weeks. The Prime Minister is speaking now only because of the release of an independent documentary on the project which unveils the deceit of the government in killing this project. Fifth, the tragedy of Anaklia, and here we mean especially the tragedy for the people of Anaklia village who have been left without jobs, with smashed hopes and with an environmental catastrophe in their front yards, is singularly the fault of the Georgian state, which stopped ADC from being able to finish the project that we started. The Georgian government has now owned, controlled and neglected the site for almost 3 years since they terminated the investment agreement with ADC. This government has not lifted a finger nor invested a tetri in the mitigation of the environmental problem they created by stopping the project, nor in the completion and development of civic infrastructure in Anaklia and its surrounding area, much less moving to resume construction of the port. Sixth, the Prime Minister's simulations announcement that he is stopping the development of a large port at Poti demonstrates by his own words the insincerity and absurdity of his statements about the government's plans to develop Anaklia. As the Prime Minister knows very well, it has been the government's continued encouragement of the potential development of a deep water port at Poti that has been one of the major obstacles to banks and private investors in financing the construction of a larger deep water port at Anaklia. Of course, the Prime Minister is in a difficult position on this subject, as the Pandora Papers proved that the Georgian Dream Party leader, Mr. Ivanishvili, has long held a business interest in the development of the Poti Free Industrial Zone, which depends on the development and expansion of Poti Port. So he is trying to walk a fine line between pretending to encourage the development of Anaklia port while not alienating his party leader and other oligarchic interests with stakes in the development of Poti Port. Seventh, as confirmed by the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development's own audit, the amount of ADC's investment was 75 million USD and indeed higher, which 40 million came from Messrs. Khazaradze and Japaridze, not 3 million as claimed by the Prime Minister. Lastly, as the Prime Minister should also well know, ADC has sought continuously to achieve a negotiated solution to the legal dispute over Anaklia port. Filing an arbitration case was a last resort for Anaklia Development Consortium and its shareholders, forced upon us and them by the government's determined opposition to letting ADC finish building the project and to its efforts to bring in other investors and banks for financing it. ADC's demand for damages in the arbitration case are necessary for it to protect its and its shareholders' legal rights, but the Georgian government, well known that it can settle the matter without spending a penny from the state budget, where it can negotiate reasonably and in good faith with ADC to secure the investment and financing needed to finish the Anaklia deep water port project. Ninth, our desire is to see the Anaklia port developed, plain and simple. This latest scheme from the government has no chance of success, and we think the government knows this. It's another case of the government stalling and wanting to blame others for its failure. The statement of Anaklia Development Consortium reads. Ted Jonas, member of the supervisory board of the ADC, talked about the case in detail with BMG's TV's program Business Course. Here are some main points from the interview.
You know, I've been involved in Georgia for a very long time, and I first came here in 1994, and in 1996 I started practicing business law with Georgian partners. And one of the early transactions that we did in the late 90s was a privatization where the state kept 51%, and there was a sale of 49% of the shares. This was a typical method in the 1990s. It's a typical method used by the Russian government when the state wants to maintain control. Especially in Georgia, I'm not aware of any other case where it was tried after Zestafoni ferroalloy in the late 1990s, which was a very ugly and I would say probably corrupt situation. So it is essentially an archaic idea, and one that was corrupt and failed when it was used a lot in the 1990s. And today, of course, in a more modern world, that is only more true. No reputable international investor, and by that I mean a public company, whether Western or not Western, but a company that has listed shares, a company that has bonds, no international bank, no international financial institution is going to participate in a project that is dominated and controlled by a 51% state interest. That is simply a matter of investor preference. But then secondly, you have the unfortunately bad reputation of the Georgian government as a partner. And so I can tell you, as someone who practiced law in this country for a long time, I would never advise a foreign investor to do a deal in this country as a minority shareholder in a majority state-owned company unless there were massive protections for their security, which would partly require them, I would say, to be an international public company. The only investor who would come in a case where the state owns 51% and the private investor will own 49% is going to be, I'm sorry to say, some sort of non-transparent oligarch, or perhaps a state fund from one of the countries that's not democratic and is not transparent in its actions. So the whole idea of Anaklia Port, of bringing in European investors, American investors, reputable, publicly listed Eastern investors from Central Asia or China, is destroyed by this plan of having a 51% controlling state interest. Of course, this is enormously ironic, is that the state still to this day, and Mr. Kharibashvili in his statement yesterday, complains that, he says Anaklia Development or Khazaradze, but that's not true. The international financial institutions, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, OPIC, Asian Industrial Development Bank, said, it wasn't us, they said there needs to be some sort of guarantee on this project. Whoever provides it, there has to be a guarantee. That had been negotiated between the parties to where there was a pretty good idea on the table that a guarantee of $150 to $200 million would be acceptable, of which the European Union was offering to provide 50 to 75 million. Khazaradze and Japaridze, from their own resources, were offering to provide as a parent guarantee 50 to 75 million. And the only thing that was being asked of the Georgian government was to match it, 50 to 75 million. That would be their part, and not cash. This is a guarantee, which is a conditional liability. And now Kharibashvili comes out yesterday and says that the state is going to be a 51% owner and developer of this project, which will require the state to invest at least $300 million in cash. Now, if they're willing to invest $300 million in cash in the project, which, by the way, doesn't even include their obligations to build roads and railroads and all the other infrastructure that they have to do, why on earth were they not willing to do a $50 to $75 million guarantee, which doesn't even require any money out of the state budget unless and until the small chance contingency occurs that the guarantee has to be drawn upon? So, and also note the fact that 2 years ago, I said, I don't see them conducting a tender, and yeah, it was exactly correct. Here we are 2 years later, and there's been no tender. Not only that, it's been almost 3 years since they terminated the contract with us, and literally the day they terminated the contract with us, they said that within 2 weeks, this is back in January 2020, they said they were going to announce a tender within 2 weeks. Here we are, no tender has ever been announced. And in fact, Kharibashvili didn't announce a tender yesterday. He announced a bizarre scheme, which nobody really understands and which is very obscure. The most rational path for Georgia to pursue is the one that we proposed to them all through the fall of 2019 so that they wouldn't terminate the agreement. And then after they terminated the agreement, we continued to propose this. And then even after we filed the arbitration case, we continued to propose this, which is the following, that ADC invested $75 million in the project. That is confirmed by the Ministry of Economy already, audited numbers that the Ministry of Economy confirmed. That $75 million investment is worth something to a new investor. The port was dredged, the berm was built up, and in fact, we know that the government, in talking to investors, is selling or advertising the project by saying that this work has already been done. So the rational path forward is for us, the government, and a new investor to work together on structuring the new investor's investment in the project to include the purchase of our existing interest in the project. And that purchase could either be in cash, if they don't want to have ADC as a partner in the project, or it could be a minority share in the project. And among the different very reputable international investors that we spoke to, and the government knows who they are because we had discussions with them even after we filed the arbitration case about this, there were some investors who said, yes, well, a minority interest might be okay. There were some who may have preferred a buyout. If you want to, we can discuss why I think it's likely that ADC would be a minority shareholder or would exit the project entirely. But the point of it is that we thoroughly accept the idea that the project likely must have a new majority investor, and ADC's interest will either be bought out by that investor, not by the state, will either be bought out by that investor, or that investor we would structure the transaction so that we have a minority stake. And by the way, that kind of transaction can be done either through essentially a direct transaction with a new investor, or it could be done by a tender where the accommodation of ADC's interest would be built into the tender. And this whole problem could go away. And they have had that opportunity on their desk for more than 3 years, since before they terminated the agreement, and they have refused to go for that rational solution. I would say that there was a senior representative of the government, a minister, who conducted negotiations with us after some of Georgia's foreign partners essentially pressured the government to try to solve this problem. They did conduct negotiations with us at a very senior level, and I can't give details of those discussions, but this was exactly the kind of structure that was discussed. Unfortunately, the government cut off those discussions. And I want to make one last point. Maybe you were going to ask a question about it. Gharibashvili yesterday was jumping up and down and screaming practically about saying that ADC was demanding $1.5 billion. Actually, he keeps saying Hazaradze and Japaridze, which of course it's not, it's ADC. Was demanding in the arbitration $1.5 billion in damage, and all they want to do is steal money from the state. He knows that's a lie. The only thing that we want to do, and the only thing that we have ever wanted to do, is to build this project. And there is a very long written record, and there is a very long record of our conduct, which proves that we filed the arbitration case only as a last resort. We filed it only to protect our legal interests. The purpose of the arbitration case is not in any way to take any money from the Georgian government, because we know that means taking it from teachers and policemen and the army, who are already underpaid and badly treated in this government. No, what we would do is essentially, as I said, our interest, our stake would be taken care of by the structuring of the project, not by any cash payment from the Georgian government. The Georgian government wouldn't pay one tetri in order to settle out this case if it wants to.
Mediation for Business annual international forum dedicated to the development of mediation in Georgia was held in Tbilisi this week, supported by USAID Rule of Law program. Details were discussed in an analytics talk show on BMG TV's Business Morning program. Welcome to the studio. And
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Sopom, I will start with you. What is the ultimate goal of mediation to start with, and how often do businesses turn to mediation? What did this discussion that you held yesterday show?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us, first of all. Well, mediation is not as frequently used as it can in Georgia, and the primary reason for that is probably two. First is lack of awareness about all the benefits that mediation can bring and how valuable it can be as a process. And that includes, we often say that mediation is fast, it offers an opportunity for a very efficient resolution of disputes. It's also, cheaper as well, but it also has a specific value of giving the businesses opportunity to stay in control, to basically stay in control of what will be the resolution. It's a mechanism
What do you mean under that? Please explain a little bit.
So mediation is an assisted negotiation. A mediator comes to assist, to help the parties, to talk about what will be the best possible solution for their including commercial interests. So it's not about being right or wrong at law. That is what happens in arbitration or in court litigation, in adversarial proceedings. But it's more about, okay, so what have you missed to better understand each other and better understand what is it that you need as a business. It's a very solution-oriented, solution-focused, future-focused, not like blame-focused process, but it's a resolution-focused process. So mediators assist the parties to think about what is it that they want to achieve, what will be the risks if they don't settle. So what legal risks they face. So that's the primary value of mediation. Yeah.
Michael, you were the leading lawyer of General Electric, one of the giant companies. Now you are consulting other businesses how to use mediation as the tool to solve their business disputes. What is your main message? Why mediation?
The main message is businesses want results. And you need to have available to you all of the different ways of getting results. And so mediation is an avenue that is low cost, has minimal impact on the business relationship, and often produces a result very early in a conflict. So the main message I would say is that there's really almost never any downside to trying mediation. And if your objective is to find a resolution, because what businesses want is a resolution.
If businesses want resolution, then I will be turning to what Sopa said earlier, that mediation is not that frequently used in Georgia. What are some of the barriers or challenges that you see in this direction?
I've heard this, and by attending the conference, that was been a wonderful conference that was organized yesterday, I heard that. I'm not surprised, because mediation is in its early stages. Your law was passed in 2019. 2020 it came into effect, and so I think it's actually being used quite a bit from what I guess in such a short time. But I would also point out that, and SOPA has written about this, is that mediation actually has long, ancient traditions in Georgia as having third parties who facilitate disputes. So it's not exactly a foreign process. It's actually a very natural process that people have used here for hundreds of years.
What happens if mediation doesn't work, and is it still worth going through all this process?
Absolutely. Look, it's wonderful if you can reach a resolution and find a settlement, but if you don't, at least you've had an opportunity to understand what is it you really want to achieve. Maybe you don't find a resolution at the mediation, but you might find it later on. It's a moment where you can learn more about the other party and what they want to achieve. So as I said, I don't think there's ever really any downside to trying to find a resolution early, guided by a third party. And by the way, businesses, as Sopa mentioned, businesses like negotiating, and this is just a form of negotiation assisted by a third person.
Yes, Sopa, what is USAID doing to support this process? You mentioned one of the challenges, that there is lack of awareness. Is this the only direction that USAID is supporting in this process?
That is not the only direction. It is one of the big directions, because lack of awareness about the benefits of mediation is a major issue. So one is to raise knowledge and understanding of the benefits, including through organizing conferences like this one. But another one is also businesses like to hear from their peers. So if I, as a mediator, I say mediation is good, I'm preaching to them. They might say, of course you're saying that. But if they hear from somebody like, Mike, who comes from the business world, and if they hear from their peers who have actually tried the process and can talk about their specific experiences, then they will have more trust and credibility to try that process. So one is to create those opportunities for exchange, to learn more about the benefits of mediation. Of course, the other one is to educate lawyers to know what is their role in that process, because lawyers are the ones who advise their clients. Clients listen to their lawyers, they trust their lawyers, so lawyers need to know what the process is and what is their role in mediation. It's different than their role in court. In court, they have to persuade that their client is right. In mediation, they have to be helpful to the client to reach a resolution. So that's the other one. And we work also with the judiciary, because we want to promote referral to mediation by judges. Disputes come to courts, to judges, and they refer cases to mediation. So we assist the judiciary to expand court-annexed mediation programs across the country. And of course, we work with the Mediators Association of Georgia, which is the leading organization, to ensure that there are quality mediators who will actually handle those cases and the resolutions will be reached.
Yes, so during this period when mediation was introduced to Georgia, do we already have some cases, some disputes that have been settled, and what type of businesses are kind of like appealing for mediation?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, USAID, rule of law programming, has been working on mediation since 2012. That's when the first pilot project started at City Court. And since then, there are cases that are referred, majority of cases are referred by judges. There are a few cases where business representatives come on their own, without referral of judges, but that only happens if the lawyers know what mediation is and they actually advise their clients. So there are figures, there are statistics, including at the court. The average settlement rate is also promising. It's about 60-70% of settlement rate at courts. So it's a good settlement rate, and it's just about having more more referrals, more businesses being more comfortable with the process and knowing what the process can offer them.
Michael, when you are consulting, I mean, what are some of the main points or main focuses that you are accentuating while talking with the businesses? What are some of the examples, maybe even big examples, that could that show that mediation really brings results?
One thing I think that's very useful for businesses to understand, especially small and medium-sized businesses, is to include a mediation requirement in their contracts, particularly when they do international contracts. And I'll explain why. A small company that does a contract, say, for delivering goods or services, or working with a company in France or the United States or in other parts of Asia, if there's a dispute, it could be for them, it could be a very difficult thing to try to resolve, to hire lawyers in foreign countries, to try to resolve it through courts of other countries or arbitration. If they have a mediation requirement, then there's a higher chance that they'll be able to resolve it through amicable negotiations at a relatively low cost. So one thing I would say to businesses that never have tried mediation, I'd say, well, think about using it as a way to help you engage to make it easier for you to engage in international business, so you don't have to worry as much about the possible costs of conflict. And then one other thing that I always say to our clients, when I used to say to my business leaders when I was working in Baker Hughes and General Electric, was that whenever you go to a major negotiation or a mediation, always keep 3 numbers in mind. And the first number is, what is your objective? What do you want to achieve as a business? And it could be a number that you can settle on. It might also be new business that you might be able to have with the other side. But have a clear objective. And that's very difficult for businesses when they have a conflict, to think of, what would we want to resolve this one if we could resolve it for? The second number is, what would be your offer that you would make? It may not be your objective, but that's part of your strategy. How do you get to your objective? And the third number is, what is something that you would accept that maybe isn't your objective, but it's better than spending time in courts or in arbitration? So that's the simple advice that I try to give to business, to help them think about how to use mediation in a way that benefits them.
You mentioned several times relatively low cost.
Yes.
Is this the cost that, for example, small and medium businesses could also handle, and relative to what?
Absolutely. Consider that, for example, an international mediation would typically only take 1 day. So you're talking about 1 day of time. The cost really for mediation is the cost of preparing. This is something business people understand, is that you don't go to a negotiation without having really prepared yourself. So there is some investment in preparing to attend a mediation, but that's a cost that you're going to have in any event if you have a dispute, right? If you go to court or if you go to arbitration, you're going to have to prepare at some point. So it's not a question of adding costs as much as making sure you have those costs more at the beginning so you can get a better solution.
Sopa, what did the conference show? I mean, because there was this discussion also about mediation. Do businesses want to know more? Do they have questions? And also, what are some of the examples or some of the role models, so to say, that they could adhere to or relate to in our environment?
Right. So one of the purposes of those conferences today and yesterday was to share as much as to learn what is the need of businesses, or if they, what are their perceptions about mediation. Why would they not go, or what would it take for them to try mediation? So it's also for us to understand more where they are coming from, where businesses are coming from, but also to share more from our perspective, like the experiences of users, of those who've tried mediation. So there are some very interesting questions that our program has tried to identify throughout this process. So one of the frequent questions that businesses raise is, so why should I try to mediate? I've already tried to negotiate. So I've tried to negotiate. So why do I need a third person to? And sometimes they might perceive it, and that's not only in Georgia. Actually, a study in Queen Mary University showed that across Europe that's the same. So sometimes they perceive that trying mediation reflects bad on them, because it might look as they were not able to handle that problem themselves. So we're trying to shift that mindset, showing that doctors don't operate on themselves. They call other doctors to do that, right? So if you have a problem, as good a negotiator you might be, you are embedded in the dispute. The other party will perceive you as an adversary. They're not going to listen. Mediator comes from the neutral mindset, not embedded, and so it's very helpful to have that neutral, skilled person to work with the parties, to help them assess the risk, to help them talk about interests and find solutions that will, match their interests. So we're trying to convey this message throughout these conferences these days.
Yeah. So it's more trying to have like a win-win solution rather than win-lose.
It's
solution,
absolutely.
right?
So and the main message is also that businesses don't have to settle. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
What might sound like you don't lose anything. There's no way you can lose in mediation. Yeah. You go, you give it a try, you become more prepared. And the best that can happen, you find a resolution, which might be very different and open new perspectives, or might be okay.
But if you don't, you're no worse off than you didn't try mediation.
Exactly. So you don't have to.
Yeah.
If it doesn't go, you can always say, well, we have tried, and that's it. We know more about the dispute now. And that's it. So there's no way you can lose. And,
which can also help us if we go to the court.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah. Yes. So, Michael, to zoom out a little bit and to look at the bigger picture, how could usage of mediation or utilizing this opportunity affect the overall business environment, the overall investment environment? Because I mentioned several cases that we have, for example, in international arbitration courts against Georgia. Could using more mediation and thinking more what you want to get out of the process ultimately help improve to some extent business and investment?
I think your question answers itself. Absolutely. And again, there's no downside to attempting to do this. And if if you have if you try it 3 times and you only have 1 success, that's 1 success.
Which is not bad.
Which is not bad. And maybe you'll have 2 or 3 successes. You don't know unless you try.
That's really nice. Thank you so much
Thank you very
for
much.
being with us and taking our questions. The project of the Black Sea submarine electricity cable connecting the European Union and Georgia has been discussed at the meeting of the EU Global Gateway Board. According to Oliver Varhey, EU Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, 2.3 billion euro will be invested. The project of the Black Sea submarine cable provides arrangement of an underwater high-voltage transmission network which should connect the electrical energy systems of Georgia and Europe. If the project is implemented, a 1,195 kilometers long cable, 101,000 kilometers underwater and 95 kilometers land part will be connected to Romania, which will allow the countries of the South Caucasus and Romania to take advantage of the expanded export opportunities and trade in electricity, taking into account the hourly prices of the electricity market. The implementation of the project will help to strengthen the energy security of Europe and the South Caucasus region, development of the renewable energy sector, and increase the transit opportunities between the mentioned regions. More on decisions and news in the economy this week.
According to the decision of government of Georgia, Anaklia port will be built with state participation. Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili announced this at the government meeting. Several months ago, I instructed the Ministry of Economy and we are preparing a new tender. According to our decision, the port of Anaklia will be built with the participation of the state, where the state will own 51% and will announce an international competition for the rest and select partner companies. This project is abandoned. The place is wrecked. Therefore, it's categorically unacceptable. We should urgently select international partner companies and we should also start investing in this project. This project will be implemented with our participation. The state will implement this project together with foreign or other companies, said the Prime Minister. In January 2020, the Georgian government terminated the contract with Anaklia Development Consortium, which resulted in an appeal to arbitration court by both the consortium and one of the investors, Bob Meyer. At the time of termination of contract, Anaklia Development Consortium had already invested $74 million in the project. The Prime Minister of Georgia, Irakli Garibashvili, declares that an IT hub will be set up in the non-functional parliament building in Kutaisi. As the Prime Minister of Georgia noted at the government meeting, negotiations are underway with one of the Israeli companies, which is interested in creating a technological hub on the base of the parliament. We are working with an Israeli company which expresses its desire to create an IT hub on the base of the Kutaisi parliament, and not only a technological hub which will attract and employ students and young people working in this field, said Irakli Garibashvili. The Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development, Levon Davitashvili, declares that the Russian Federation has not officially appealed to government of Georgia regarding the issue of restoring direct flights to Georgia. According to the minister, there are many difficulties and challenges regarding the restoration of direct flights between Georgia and Russia, and this issue cannot be solved unilaterally. Regarding this matter, there are many technical issues, many difficulties and many challenges, and this is not an issue to be resolved unilaterally, although we don't have such an official address yet. But there are certain restrictions for various international aviation organizations in relation to Russian airlines, so this issue cannot be resolved easily today, said Levon Davitashvili. The National Statistics Office of Georgia published a report on external merchandise trade. According to the document, Georgia exported commodities $419 million worth in November, which was $61 million up compared to the same period of the previous year. As of 11 months data, the value of export increased by 31.8%, reaching $5.3 million. Along with exports, imports also increased and amounted to $1.24 billion. Compared to the previous year, the volume of imports has increased by $215 million. Detailed data on the external merchandise trade of Georgia will be published on December 19, 2022. Russian investments in Georgia doubled in the third quarter of this year, according to the data from the National Statistics Office of Georgia. $41.8 million accounted for Russia in quarter 3, which was 122% more compared to the same period of the previous year. As of the information requested by BNG from Geostat, most investments from Russia were made in the real estate sector, namely $29 million. This sector includes both real estate operations as well as leasing and providing services to customers. In addition to real estate, as Geostat notes, Russian investments were made in the financial sector, which includes direct foreign investments in banking, microfinance, and insurance organizations. The construction sector is also in the top 3 with an investment opportunity with an investment of approximately $3.5 million. Top companies by Russian investment in quarter 3. LLC Trade Center on Bagrationi, LLC Tsereteli Wine and Spirits, LLC Marlo, LLC GT Cloud, LLC K and Georgian Spirit, LLC GN, LLC Tshaltubo, LLC Dot Technology, LLC Air Meridiani, LLC Green KP. The governor of the National Bank of Georgia says the future dynamics of inflation are of particular importance for the monetary policy of the National Bank. According to him, inflation has been exceeding its target rate for quite a long time. The risks of increasing inflationary expectations still remain. According to Koba Gwenetadze, we should expect inflation to return to the target rate in the second half of the year. According to the current basic macroeconomic forecast, inflation in 2022 will be within 11.9% on average, while in 2023 it will be within 5.3%, and other things being equal, it will return to the target rate in the second half of the next year. Deviation from the target rate of inflation is caused by increased short-term expectations and still high prices of commodity raw materials on international markets. Against the backdrop of their decrease and strengthened exchange rate, the mentioned deviation will be eliminated in the medium term, Koba Gwenetadze said.
Hungarian budget airline Wizz Air will add new routes from Georgia's Western Kutaisi International Airport to 5 European cities starting in June, the United Airports of Georgia announced on Tuesday. Next summer, the company will launch flights to Brussels, Madrid, Frankfurt, Hamburg, and Poznan. The direct flights between the Kutaisi Airport and the cities will be operated out twice a week. In addition, the airline is increasing flight frequency to Paris, Milan, Prague, and Memmingen. Evelyn Jekyll, acting network officer at Wizz Air, says the price of aviation fuel will remain high next year as well. Despite this, the representative of low-cost airlines claims that they try to keep ticket prices low.
I'm delighted to be here to announce the third based aircraft in Kutaisi from Wizz Air. We also introduced 5 new destinations to Hamburg, to Frankfurt, to Charleroi, to Poznan, and to Brussels. I think this is a really unique period as we are building back and increasing traffic to Kutaisi and to Georgia. This will mean 800,000 departing seats in a year, and overall we have 27 direct destinations in 15 countries from Kutaisi Airport. So I'm really delighted to be here and announce this to you today.
What are the main challenges today in this sector for Wizz Air?
I think the main challenges today are obviously fuel prices are very high, and this means that we have to absorb that cost to be able to offer low fares to our passengers. Also, one challenge is that we are lacking air traffic controllers across Europe, which causes a lot of delays, which we have experienced, unfortunately, as passengers during the summer. But I believe I'm very positively looking towards the future as we came out of the pandemic and hopefully into a more peaceful future.
Hungarian ambassador to Georgia, Anna Maria Siko, also provided a comment for the checkpoints.
As Ambassador of Hungary, I'm very pleased to be here on such an occasion, as this is the third aircraft positioned in Kutaisi. We can say we are now the #1 carrier from and to Georgia. But we also have very good contacts. This will bring tourism, this will bring new jobs, but I'm hoping this will bring even more economic ties between our countries, more investment and more contacts. Hungary is supporting Georgia 100% in the European Union. And so next year, all those locations are part of the EU, so even more ties with the European Union. We're also hoping to have many visits from my ministers, and your Prime Minister was in Hungary in October. We agreed that the whole government will come here in September. We have a joint meeting. But even before that, this Saturday, there will be a big announcement of a huge energy contract between Georgia and the EU, Hungary in particular.
More on this week's Business Wire put together by our reporter Natia Taktakishvili.
Georgi Dabrundashvili, general manager of Ashley Homester, declares that demand has increased for the furniture that is used for furnishing the rental property. The company, which has been importing American furniture to Georgia for several years, says that sales are increased in 2022, but not at the expense of a large flow of foreigners arriving in Georgia. According to Dabrundashvili, out of 6 branches of Ashley Homester, the store has the most foreign customers in Batumi. In Batumi, there are more foreign, mostly Russian-speaking customers, whether they are citizens of Russia or Ukraine. There is an increased demand for the type of furniture that is used in rental apartments, says the general manager of Ashley Homester. Zviad Grzelidze, the founder of fruit porridge manufacturing company Bayer Foods, talks about the challenges of small enterprises and notes that in the process of dealing with difficulties, the price of their products has increased by 22-23%. According to him, cooperation with large chain supermarkets is a big burden and only small enterprises can handle it. The main challenge is cooperation with retail chain supermarkets. It's an extremely large burden for small enterprises. In particular, the chain supermarkets have increased the entry fee, cashback and registration fee a lot. This makes the product more expensive by at least 20-25%. There are many financing programs for creating an enterprise. However, no one cares about the realization of the production. I am not saying that the state should help the enterprise in sales, although some kind of benefit should be good, says Zviad Grzelidze. The company currently produces 25 types of fruit porridges, and in the near future it plans to produce up to 30 tons of fruit snacks. Company Next Group, which brought the international brands Windham and Radisson to Georgia, has finished this year successfully. The sales director of the company told BMG that along with the annual growth of Batumi real estate market, the company's sales also increased. 2022 was very successful for Next Group. In general, Batumi's real estate market is growing very fast every year, and this was also reflected in our sales. Sales exceeded 120 million GLR in 2022, which was quite a good indicator, says Ekaterina Daniani. Next Group has 2 completed and 5 ongoing projects. Among the completed projects are Next Green and Next Orange. At this stage, we have 5 ongoing projects. 2 of them are Windham and Radisson. We started Radisson in summer. There is high interest in the project. There is interest from various countries, including the CIS and European countries. This is proved by the fact that 20% of the Radisson project is already sold. It should be noted that we are also starting a new project, this time in Mahinjauri, in the Wind City of the Botanical Garden. The complex consists of 1,200 apartments. It will be customized to the customer's needs as much as possible, she explains. As for the current projects, they include Villa Park in Chakwi, Next White and Next Apartments in Batumi. Hungarian budget airline Wizz Air plans to station its third passenger jet at Kutaisi International Airport from June 2023 and resume direct flights from the location to 5 more new destinations: Brussels, Madrid, Frankfurt, Hamburg and Poznan. Wizz Air's third passenger jet will increase flight frequencies on the existing destination as well as assist the creation of additional jobs. According to Tamara Twadze, director of Association of Georgian Airports, direct regular flights from Kutaisi International Airport in all 5 directions will be performed twice a week. 1 new frequency will be added to the frequencies of Paris, Milan, Prague and Memmingen. As of 11 months of 2022, the air company served up to 550,000 passengers. By June 2023, Wizz Air will fly from Kutaisi to 27 destinations in Europe and Middle East. Workshop Adena, which creates various traditional accessories with thick felt and silk, is operating in Racha, namely Oni, since 2015. The founder of the workshop and artist designer by professional, Lili Maisturadze, told BMG after finishing the institute she decided to return to Racha, open a workshop and teach this activity to other people. According to her, the interest is rather high from tourists and the company welcomes exports because handicrafts are more appreciated abroad. As for the challenges, according to her, expensive materials are the most difficult challenge. We also have one challenge: being far away from the capital city, which means being away from opportunities. Enterprises in the city can participate in exhibitions more easily and are more active, and we have to strengthen online sales and find other ways, says Lali Maisturadze. Traditional sovereign produced by Adena are sold in Oni as well as in the social enterprise store Eski in Tbilisi and via the social media. As for the fees, it starts from 5 gelari and most expensive product costs 250 gelari. According to the founder, the price varies depending on the complexity of the work. The initial investment for the creation of the workshop was 7,000 gelari. Healthy Food Cafe Drov was opened on Irakli Abashidze Street in Vake. The cafe is a subsidiary of PCA Healthy, a company that helps people become slim. According to Georgi Vadachkoria, co-founder of the company, nutritionists participate in the creation of dishes together with the chefs, and this is the main niche of the cafe. There is a balanced amount of protein, fat and carbohydrates in all dishes. We make healthy dishes without sugar or gluten. In our food, the protein, fat and carbohydrates are balanced in such a way that the body receives the required amount of nutrients. Our dishes are delicious as well as useful, said Georgi Vadachkoria. Currently, the cafe employs 40 people, including students, and its co-founder, speaking to BMG, notes that the offer of a high salary and flexible schedule has made it easier to find qualified personnel. PCA Healthy has been operating on the market for 4 years, has more than 4,000 active users, and last year became a partner of Mani Benish in Shark Tank, which received 90,000 gelari in the development of the company.
Georgia's sound economic management and good business environment will continue to support economic activity, but further reforms will be required to keep GDP growth between 4 to 4.5%, according to the World Bank's Country Economic Memorandum (CEM) for Georgia. The report, titled Charting Georgia's Future Competitive, Connected and Capable, was launched at an event hosted jointly by the World Bank and the government of Georgia. The report depicts Georgia's significant development gains over the last decade and seeks to inform government policies and help facilitate similar successes over the next 10 years. Specifically, the CEM features the story of a small, open and resilient economy that has made considerable progress in GDP growth and poverty reduction, yet with more limited success in improving productivity and creating well-paying jobs. The Country Economic Memorandum recommends that Georgia could maximize its growth potential by facilitating the ongoing structural and spatial transformations, improving productivity performance at the sector and firm level, increasing connectivity and external trade, and building up and better utilizing human resources. More in our interview with Sebastian Molenius, World Bank's Regional Director for South Caucasus. Let us start with the key messages. What are the key messages that are coming from this document for Georgia?
I think the key message, first of all, is really less of a message, but more of a story, a really fascinating story, which shows that Georgia has really undergone a tremendous transformation that I think really seeks its parallel in other countries in the Europe and Central Asia region. We have seen real GDP per capita about at 5.2% over a 10-year period up to 2019, just before the COVID crisis. That is the second fastest growing economy in all of Europe and Central Asia. We have seen FDI inflows during that same period, again, over a 10-year period at about 7.5 to 8%. Again, the leading country in terms of attracting FDI at that time. And as a result, what we have seen is a major impact on poverty. Poverty rates have dropped from just under 40% to under 20%, halving during that period. We then, of course, had the COVID pandemic, which saw a sharp drop in growth. But right after the pandemic, through some very tough but good policies, I think we are now back on a growth trajectory, double-digit growth over the last 2 years. I think that is truly impressive. Yes, not all of it is due to internal factors or some external factors, but a lot of it is from internal factors. However, the growth story now becomes more difficult, more complex. So many of the reforms have been undertaken, and now to become an high-income country, to move from an upper middle-income country to a high-income country, some tough reforms need to be done. We need to increase the education and the skills level in the country. Productivity of firms need to improve. We need to increase the domestic savings rate, both at the country or economy level, but also at the household level as well. The spatial transformation is incomplete. We have regions that are lacking and high inequality in the country still. So these are some of the outstanding reforms that still need to be undertaken to ensure that Georgia can continue to grow over the next 10 years and eventually become a high-income country.
Let's dig a little bit deeper. For example, the World Bank says that Georgia's economy is benefiting from structural transformation, but the process remains incomplete. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, first of all, and what are some of the barriers that that are impeding so that the process is complete?
So when I talk about structural transfer, or the report, I should say, it talks about structural transformation. I think that over these last 30 years, we've seen Georgia move from a society and an economy that was largely based on agriculture to services. And that, again, is quite an important achievement, seeing a shift like that. It takes other countries many more years, but Georgia has undertaken that shift. With that said, we still have about 30% of employment in the agricultural sector. So we do need to make sure that the agricultural sector becomes more protective, becomes more competitive, and that at the same time we can ensure that those that are involved in low sort of value agriculture can transition to other better paying jobs. And again, the skills agenda is going to play an important role. So that's number one. The second challenge, I think, is around the productivity agenda, in particular firm productivity. So we see that again, despite the growth, that has not translated to firm level productivity, which in turn allows firms to offer a higher and better paying job to the people. So what we see in terms of solutions to this issue is that we need to increase access to finance. We need to increase access to markets. Again, I go back to the skills agenda, in particular managerial skills need to improve. And finally, we need to ensure that we continue with business enabling reforms as well as removing tax incentives that may hinder firms to grow and to become more productive. That's on the productivity side. On the agricultural side, we need to make sure that we continue with land consolidation, land registration. There's some important reforms that are taking place right now. The country will never grow in the agricultural sector unless we do have a little bit more consolidation. We need to ensure that the logistics and the value chains within the agricultural sector continue to improve. And again, I go back to the skills. We need to ensure that we have climate smart agriculture and we have better skills, irrigation schemes, modern, innovative agriculture that can drive that sector forward.
Do you mean that under that is that Georgia's labor force made a very modest contribution to growth? What does that mean? Does it mean that they are not involved and this is a challenge, or does that mean that the quality, how they are involved in economy is also a problem?
I think you're putting your finger right on the wound. So it's the report shows that labor force participation and its contribution to growth has been relatively limited. It's about 10%. And some of the gains from the relatively high employment at about 20% is offset by an aging workforce and people that are exiting the workforce at the same time. And so what we see right now is we see fairly high levels of unemployment as well as underemployment within Georgia right now. And there seems to be a mismatch between the skills that the private sector is looking for and what the university system, vocational training, et cetera, is providing. So we have this almost paradox whereby we have high levels of people that are looking for work and firms that are looking to employ, but they're not meeting because there's a mismatch between these two. This is something, an area that really needs to be a priority for reforms. And this is a complex one. It really starts with early childhood education, making sure that young kids are prepared for school, then going on with educational reforms in the secondary, tertiary education, and not forgetting, of course, vocational education as well. And if you allow me to make one point, I think that Georgia is missing out on a huge opportunity in terms of female labor force participation. Right now, I am not sure that you have the right environment, such as daycare for children, for elderly, to allow women to effectively participate in the workforce. I think a lot of the social norms need to change as well, because what we see is a lot of women that are exceptional when it comes to schooling in STEM subjects. They're exceptional when they come in terms of their grades, when it comes to university, but then society seems to steer a lot of women into social services, education, nursing, and the likes. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But at the same time, I think there's a huge lost opportunity because I think that there's a bigger contribution that the female labor force can make to Georgia's economy.
A lot of focus in this document on connectivity. Why is that important, and how could some global trends that we are looking around, help this process?
Yeah. So again, an excellent question. And of course, we all know that Georgia is sort of sits in this very important geographic location, connecting north and south trade routes as well as the east and the west trade routes. And then of course there's a huge potential within the South Caucasus region as well. So Georgia has always been at that crossroads between the two. And I think there are two aspects that I would like to highlight. One is I think that further investments need to be made in terms of improving the infrastructure, both the soft infrastructure and the hard infrastructure, so that Georgia can benefit from its very important geographic positioning. So of course, There are major works underway right now with the East-West Highway, and the World Bank is one of the leading IFIs that is supporting that process, both with respect to the westward expansion as well as now the eastward expansion as well. However, more can be done in terms of improving the port infrastructure, improving rails as well. I see Turkey, I see Azerbaijan, I see Kazakhstan making major investments in their rail networks, and I think that Georgia also needs to keep up. So that's on the hard infrastructure side. On the soft infrastructure side, I think more weight and importance need to be made to both increasing logistics, to ensure that when a container leaves a factory in China, that it can actually really make its way through multiple borders in the most seamless way, so that the middle corridor that hitherto has not been economically viable can become more of an option for shippers, because the logistics system is really innovative and world-class. And so these are some of the areas that I think on the soft infrastructure side that Georgia needs to look at. So that's one. The second point is that Georgia actually exports a relatively high amount compared to other countries in the regions as well. However, a lot of those exports are not produced, or the goods and services are not produced in Georgia. So take cars, for example. There are many cars that come from Europe and that are imported to Georgia, and then Georgia will then export those cars to the South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, or Central Asia as well. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I would like to see Georgian firms producing more domestically and then exporting their own goods and services to other countries. I think the potential is there, and I think it's a big opportunity for Georgia.
But the big question is how to do that, right? I mean, what could be the right policies? What could be the right practices? And that's really big question. Also, who should be doing this, and how much could the state be doing itself, right? For example, we mentioned agriculture, and you earlier mentioned that it is a good thing that Georgia has shifted from agriculture to services, and that's a structural transformation there. But the policies that we see, for example, subsidies that we see, some of the subsidies that the private sector itself says that, you know, they are of no use. The state employment program that we saw, that we do not know what it aims to achieve, and this is not me saying it, it's experts saying it. So do you think that this big state that might be becoming some kind of like a competitor for outside investors, for local investors, is that the right direction to achieve this?
So I would argue that there is an important contribution that both government and the private sector can make. To begin with, it is my firm belief that growth should be private sector led, to be clear. I think the state has a role, but that role, to my mind, is to enable that private sector-led growth. So to look at the legal and regulatory environment so that you can have free competition in key sectors. Looking at SOE reform to make sure that you don't have state-owned enterprises that are blocking some of the dynamics in a particular sector. Making sure that you do have the right tax policies in place that encourage firms to grow and not hinder them to grow. Ensuring for rule of law, a strong justice system. These are all things that are important for investors, in addition, of course, to the infrastructure that is needed for goods to go from one place to the next. And so these are all areas where I think the state does have a role to play. However, again, it's to enable private sector-led growth. At the end of the day, it's really then the private sector that also needs to step up and needs to fulfill its role and to show that entrepreneurial, that dynamism that I know exists here in Georgia. So again, from my point of view, and having worked in a number of different countries, I see that broad understanding between the respective roles exists here in Georgia, so that I'm confident that moving forward, you will continue to see that private sector-led growth. And I haven't really seen anything to the contrary in this respect.
And also, Mr. Malenios, I was listening to you, and I was just thinking, what is the role of the messages that investors and the private sector get from the government itself? Take, for example, Anaklia port. we heard yesterday from the Prime Minister that the state itself might be involved and the budget might be involved in building this port, because there is an opportunity for the middle corridor, right, and for the new port. But before that, the main focus coming from the government was in many times that this is not a bankable project. We don't know how this port might be successful. Do the words have meanings for the private sector and for
Look, of
investors?
course, words always have meanings. I go back to an investor survey that the World Bank and some other international financial institutions undertakes on a regular basis, where we interview investors from across the world on what are some of the key challenges, but also opportunities that they look for when investing in a country. And for Georgia, I think the results are quite interesting. Number one, it shows that it's important that you have a strong governance and a rule of law regime that exists, right? Again, something that I think where government has an important role, including, by the way, with its messaging. I think the second that they look for is a strong infrastructure. Here in Georgia, by and large, that is being put in place. It's not complete yet, unsurprisingly. It's very expensive, but I do think that that is being put in place. And you do have a port here with Poti Port as well, right? That is functioning. And then number three, and very importantly, again, I go back to this, and I apologize for repeating myself, the skills agenda. I think a lot of investors still miss, a highly skilled workforce that will allow them to come in and to seize the opportunities that they believe they could reap from, again, Georgia's very interesting and important geographic positioning. Now, with respect to individual projects, again, I am not steeped in the knowledge.
This was also an example. Of course, I understand that you won't be commenting on an individual project, but this is something that does not. I mean, Anaklia is the most vivid example and the most.
I will say
recent
this:
one.
I think it's important that government has clear strategies in place when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to renewables, when it comes to sort of key opportunities that Georgia has. And I can tell you at least that we have been working with government, in particular over the last year or two, in terms of really putting solid strategies in place. You saw that the new government strategy was recently adopted. There are a number of very important sector strategies that support that we certainly have been involved with, and that I really do believe are sound and will allow Georgia to grow and to pivot forward.
And thank you for supporting Georgia also with the Human Capital Program, which has just started and which is also very important to deal with this mismatch that we have been talking about. And also the new project that we just heard from the Oliver Varhey at the Global Gateway Board that finally this Black Sea submarine electricity cable might become really viable, 2.3 billion euro. How could, and that deals with the report as well, how could Georgia be ready to seize this opportunity?
So I am really excited about this project, and I'm really glad that the Georgian government has turned to the World Bank for support and to be one of the leading international financial institutions to work and to ensure that this very transformative project can become a reality. Taking a step back, what is the opportunity for Georgia here? So right now, Georgia has an important number one to become energy independent and secure, because remember, it still imports energy from Russia. And so I believe that fostering renewable energy here in Georgia, including hydro, of course, both large and small, but also very importantly, wind and solar, but then also working with Georgia's neighbors, Azerbaijan, where there's a huge offshore wind potential, working with Armenia, where there's a huge solar and also hydro potential. And then for Georgia to create a regional power pool and to export that, first of all, to ensure for its own energy independence, but then also to export excess energy, green, clean energy to Europe, which right now is energy starved, is a huge opportunity for Georgia economically. Now, with this said, This is one of the most complex projects that you can imagine. It'll be the longest undersea cable, energy cable, that will ever have been laid, in that it is 1,100, I believe, kilometers long, and the Black Sea is one of the deepest seas, so it's 2 kilometers deep at its deepest point. So laying a cable that long and that deep is of extraordinary complexity, of course cost as well. So I think that we're going to have to look very carefully at how best to ensure that it is technically viable and economically viable and brings benefit to the Georgian economy and its people, and then B, that we have the appropriate governance structures as well as financing structures in place to make sure that it doesn't become a debt burden for the country, but becomes an opportunity for the country to continue to grow. And the World Bank is right now leading in the technical as well as the economic feasibility study for this cable, and we look forward to working with all partners, of course with the European Union as well, in terms of making sure that this project becomes a reality.
Some of the things and the parts of the structural transformation that we have talked, some of the priorities that you have mentioned are also laid out in those 12 reforms or 12 preconditions for Georgia as well, right? So, to become EU candidate country. How would that help Georgia, and do you think Georgia has to make its priority to become the candidate country?
So look, I think that becoming a candidate country or obtaining the candidate status and eventually becoming a member of the European Union, I think is a tremendous opportunity for Georgia, and I want to also say for Europe as well. I believe in diversity. I believe that Georgia has a lot to add to Europe through its people, through its culture, through its entrepreneurship, the innovation that takes place in this country. So I really personally want to see Georgia, as a German, I'm a German citizen, I can say that I would love to see Georgia as part of the European Union. With this said, and I'd like to also add that Georgia has already done quite a bit through the, the Free Trade Association. Georgia has already implemented quite a few policies under the EU acquis here in the country, and we see that about 98%, I recently read, of all laws and regulations are actually already compliant with EU regulations or international standards. However, on the implementation side, I do believe that more work needs to be done. Again, it's quite normal, but I think that this will require ongoing attention and certainly focus. But again, now comes the hard part, where a lot of the becoming a member of the EU brings certain benefits and, of course, certain opening of the market, access to market, free labor movement, etc. But at the same time, it also comes with responsibilities. Firms will have to meet certain European standards, and that will make it more costly for them to do business. Hence, it'll make it it'll make it more challenging to become competitive. And so firms in Georgia will need to step up their game to meet the EU standards and to ensure that they can compete with, all of a sudden, new firm entrants that will be coming in from Europe and elsewhere.
Why a more capable, competitive and connected Georgia could meet all the opportunities that are in front of it?
So again, I see important opportunities when it comes to the energy transition and renewable energies and the undersea cable, as we've just mentioned. I see big opportunities right now across the middle corridor in terms of transport, but also digital connectivity as well. I see many opportunities as Europe embarks on its European journey as well. And I believe, having lived in this country now for 3.5 years, I honestly, firmly believe in this country. I believe that all sides, current government, past governments, the people of Georgia all want the best for Georgia and want to move this country forward. And I believe that a country that is more connected, again, seizing upon the opportunities that I've mentioned, that is more capable, in particular capable, that focuses on really improving upon its education system to achieve the skills that it needs to be able to move forward, is going to be absolutely critical, and something that certainly we at the World Bank are more than happy to support, and we will continue to support, again, because we believe in Georgia, we believe in its story and our partnership that we have together.
Annual growth of 4 to 5%. on average, because that's what we see is real in Georgia, because even from these two-digit growths, we see projections for 2023 when all these factors fade out, and it will be around 4 to 5%. Is that enough to achieve all these plans that we've just made for better, for more capable, and for more competitive Georgia?
So I firmly believe that. Georgia, again, I start on the initial question that you mentioned. Georgia has grown about 4.2 or 5.2% over a 10-year period in terms of real per capita GDP growth. That's amazing. That's really, really strong. We project that growth will be around 4.2 to 4.5% next year. And keep in mind, this is with extraordinary economic headwinds. We have right now a likely recession in the European Union. We have an ongoing war in Ukraine that's just around the corner. We have a sanctions regime against Russia and an economy that is in decline, and Russia still is a major trading partner for Georgia. We have global debt levels that are rising. We have global value chains that are right now being reconfigured. We have climate change that is having all sorts of impacts on agriculture and other sectors as well. And we have a changing nature of work right now with the digitization process. All of that leads to a lot of uncertainty. So for Georgia to continue to grow anywhere near 4 to 5% is quite extraordinary, and I believe can lead to a more competitive, capable and connected Georgia.
Thank you for this optimism, Mr. Malenius. I could talk with you like the whole day, but I know you are very busy, and thank you for taking time.
No, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you.
And that's all for today. We'll meet next Sunday, 11 a.m. sharp. Before that, check us out on BM.G and Forbes.G for the most updated news and analysis on business and economics. See you soon.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.